The Red Sea shimmered beneath a cloudless sky, its deceptively calm surface concealing the tensions that churned just beneath. Commander Jack Rains sat strapped into the cockpit of his FA-18 Super Hornet, cruising at 22,000 feet, scanning the horizon with a mix of vigilance and routine. He was no stranger to hostile airspace, but recent Houthi provocations had raised the stakes. Intelligence reports were clear. The Yemeni rebel group, emboldened by support from Iranian operatives, had begun targeting American assets with increasing audacity. Rains adjusted the throttle, listening to the soft whine of the engines. The USS Theodore Roosevelt was 120 nautical miles behind him, flanked by destroyers and cruisers, forming the core of Carrier Strike Group 9. Their mission had been straightforward: project deterrence, support maritime security, and intercept any credible threat. But in the chess game of geopolitics, every move held the potential for sudden escalation. And this morning, a critical miscalculation was already in motion. Below, in the arid hills of northern Yemen, a small Houthi unit was setting up what they believed would be their most significant strike yet. Hidden beneath camouflaged netting, a mobile radar unit began to ping what appeared to be a vulnerable U.S. aircraft on patrol, one they assumed was out of formation, possibly straying too far from its protective umbrella. They didn't know the jet belonged to Commander Rains, a combat-seasoned pilot with 3 deployments under his belt and nerves honed by years of skirmishes over Syria and the Gulf. The order to engage came fast. A command relay barked through encrypted radios, and a ground crew armed a surface-to-air missile, one of the Iranian-supplied Fajr-class systems capable of tracking high-speed targets. They launched without warning. The missile's exhaust scorched the dusty launch site as it tore into the sky, cutting a white-hot arc across the morning haze. Inside the Super Hornet, the threat warning system flared red. "Missile lock! Confirm missile in the air," Rains muttered, pushing the throttle to full military power. His heart rate spiked, but his voice remained steady. Years of training kicked in. He banked hard right, flares streaking behind him in a burst of infrared light. The missile adjusted, hunting its target, but the Super Hornet was nimble and well defended. Rains deployed chaff, forcing the missile to recalculate. 10 seconds of brutal maneuvering felt like a lifetime. Finally, the missile's signal blinked off his radar. It had missed. "Roosevelt, this is Falcon 1, Rains called over encrypted comms. "Missile launch confirmed from Grid Tango 8. Request immediate recon and possible air support." Back on the carrier, the Combat Information Center erupted into action. Officers tracked the trajectory and launched a Reaper drone already loitering nearby. Within minutes, high-definition images confirmed the source. A makeshift Houthi base nestled among rocky escarpments. A handful of tents, heat signatures, and the telltale wreckage of a launch platform still smoldering from the missile exhaust. The attempted takedown of a U.S. fighter jet wasn't just an act of war, it was a message. But it was a message the Houthis had misdelivered. The U.S. Navy was not known for delayed responses, and certainly not when the life of one of its aviators had hung in the balance. As Rains circled to regain position, his eyes flicked to the sea below. A calm blue canvas, as always, masked the chaos brewing at its edges. Somewhere out there, enemies plotted in shadows, emboldened by politics, ideologies, and the mistaken belief that American steel could be struck with impunity. But they had misjudged their target, underestimated their opponent, and misread the rules of the game. And for that, they were about to pay dearly. The fallout from the failed missile strike reverberated through the halls of the Pentagon and across the decks of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. In the briefing room, Commander Rains stood beside a digital display showing infrared stills of the Houthi launch site. Beside him, Captain Dana Caldwell listened intently, arms crossed, her face a careful mask of calm. She'd seen her share of close calls, but this incident was different. It marked a shift in enemy behavior. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a direct attempt to kill an American pilot. Preliminary recon confirms 2 launch vehicles and at least a dozen personnel, Rains said, tapping the screen. The missile was radar-guided, likely a Sayad-2 variant. Iranian design Caldwell nodded slowly. Which means we're not just dealing with a rogue militia. This was precision, funded, planned. A murmur of assent rippled through the officers gathered in the room. Intelligence analysts, flight crew, and mission planners all understood the weight of what had happened. An assault on a U.S. jet in international airspace was more than provocation. It demanded a calibrated but unmistakable response. Hours later, deep in the hangar bay, a trio of FA-18s underwent final checks. Rains climbed into the cockpit once again, this time as lead of a strike package codenamed Operation Quiet Thunder. Their objective was surgical: eliminate the launch site and gather evidence linking the hardware to Tehran. Stealth wasn't the goal, clarity was. As the fighters launched from the deck, twin afterburners lit up the twilight, the roar of jet engines echoing across the sea. They climbed quickly, banking east toward Yemeni airspace, flanked by a Growler electronic warfare aircraft and a support drone feeding them real-time imagery. Over the Houthi compound, the Reaper's camera captured fresh activity. Armed men loaded crates onto pickup trucks, possibly attempting to relocate. But they were out of time. The first missile struck the eastern perimeter. A fuel cache erupted into flames. A second slammed into the radar trailer, turning it into twisted wreckage. Precision-guided bombs dropped in rhythmic succession, hitting targets pre-mapped from satellite and drone surveillance. From his cockpit, Rains watched the plume rise through his heads-up display. There was no joy in the strike, only grim necessity. This was the cost of attempted murder in a theater already brimming with consequence. But just as the jets turned to return to the Roosevelt, the Growler picked up a faint radar emission. Not from below, but from the west. "Unknown contact, bearing 295, the EWO's voice crackled. "Fast moving, possible drone." In seconds, the shape was visible. Sleek, small, and armed. It was a Shahed 136 loitering munition launched from an unmarked barge off the coast. The Houthis had changed tactics. Instead of risking ground-based systems, they were now using mobile sea platforms to wage asymmetric war. "Falcon team, be advised," came Caldwell's voice over the net. "Destroyer USS gravely reports contact with hostile surface drone platforms. Secondary threat confirmed." The mission had entered a new phase, unexpected and more complex. The enemy wasn't static. They were adaptive, testing boundaries with each engagement. Rains redirected his wingman to mark the drone's course, while the support drone began beaming back targeting data. Meanwhile, the gravely engaged, firing its Phalanx C IWS at an inbound drone targeting its forward deck. It shredded the threat mid-air. Seconds later, a Standard Missile-2 screamed from the destroyer's vertical launch system tubes, arcing toward the suspected barge. The explosion that followed painted the horizon with fire. The strike package made it back to the carrier without loss, but the message was now brutally clear. The Houthis were no longer content with symbolic gestures. Their aim was destruction, and their sponsors were giving them the tools to try. Yet despite this aggression, every attempt had revealed something critical. They didn't fully understand who they were provoking. Back in the Roosevelt's war room, Rains debriefed. His face was drawn, his tone analytical. "They tried to escalate. We neutralized the site, but they're shifting methods. We're going to see more sea-based threats. Next time, they won't wait for us to strike first." Captain Caldwell leaned forward. "And next time, neither will we." In the silence that followed, strategy met reality. The U.S. wouldn't be caught off guard again. The Houthi fighters had made a fatal miscalculation, not just in attempting to down a jet, but in thinking the U.S. would play by their rules. The battlefield had shifted, and now every move would be met with devastating precision. The sea shimmered beneath the midday sun as the USS Theodore Roosevelt cut through the waves, a floating fortress of steel and strategy. Inside the operations center, the tension was subtle but unmistakable. Captain Dana Caldwell stood over a tactical map, her finger tracing the last known location of the Houthi drone barge destroyed days earlier. Intelligence was trickling in. New coordinates, intercepted chatter, thermal anomalies along the Yemeni coastline. The conflict wasn't winding down, it was evolving. Commander Rains stepped into the room, helmet in hand, his flight suit creased with sweat and grime. He'd just returned from a reconnaissance patrol. Low altitude, eyes on. "We've got signs of a new launch site forming inland. They're moving fast. Not military-grade fortifications, but definitely setting up for something. Maybe another missile battery, maybe drone logistics." Caldwell's gaze narrowed. "They're not retreating. They're repositioning." Rains nodded. "And they're getting smarter. Less exposure, more mobility. We won't be able to rely on long planning cycles anymore. If we hesitate, we lose initiative." On the deck above, jets roared and landed in a ballet of force. Every flight now carried live munitions, not just for show of force, but in expectation of engagement. Morale was high, but weariness crept in around the edges. Every sailor knew what was at stake. The Houthis weren't just trying to damage equipment, they were probing for weakness, psychological, procedural, technological. Back in the Red Sea, a destroyer on picket duty, the USS Gravely, picked up an irregular acoustic signature from a shipping lane often used by commercial tankers. It wasn't a surface drone this time. It was underwater. Within minutes, the Roosevelt's anti-submarine warfare unit was activated. Sonar buoys dropped from helicopters began mapping patterns. What they found was deeply troubling. A semi-submersible drone, loaded with explosives, running dark along an autonomous route toward the carrier group. Caldwell didn't flinch as the report came in. "We neutralize it immediately. No protocol delays. Get me the Poseidon team airborne now." Rains was already halfway to the hangar, barking into his comms. "Scramble Neptune 1. Weapons hot. Confirm sonar ping and deploy depth charges." Minutes later, the P-8 Poseidon swooped low over the suspected area, deploying a trio of small charges that detonated with disciplined fury beneath the waves. Metal debris breached the surface, twisted remnants of what could have become a catastrophe. The drone was obliterated. The ship was safe. But again, the message was clear. The Houthis weren't improvising. They were escalating with intent. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a new order came in from U.S. Central Command, precision strike authorization across 3 suspected drone fabrication sites. This wasn't retaliation, it was prevention. Rains led the sortie, accompanied by a veteran pilot from the VFA-31 Tomcatters, call sign Reaper. Their target was buried deep inland, camouflaged under a network of abandoned warehouses. Satellite recon showed activity, work lights at night, inbound trucks, heavy electrical signatures, not just storage, production. As the jets approached, anti-air batteries flared to life, but they were outdated, no match for the electronic countermeasures and jamming fields deployed ahead of the fighters. Rains zeroed in on the coordinates, dropped a pair of bunker busters, and pulled hard into a climb as fire engulfed the compound. Secondary explosions confirmed the presence of munitions inside. Reaper's voice crackled over comms. "Good hits. Target's a crater." The return flight was quiet. Exhaustion hummed behind every breath, but so did clarity. This wasn't a war won in days or even weeks. It was a contest of will and innovation. The Houthis had underestimated their opponent. They thought asymmetric warfare gave them the advantage, but they failed to grasp one critical truth. The U.S. military wasn't static. It learned. It adapted. On the Roosevelt, Caldwell met Rains on the flight deck as the final jet touched down. She didn't speak immediately. The wind carried salt and heat across the steel under their feet. "They're going to keep coming," she said at last. Rains looked toward the horizon. "So will we." Beneath them, below decks, sailors refueled aircraft, restocked missile bays, reviewed satellite feeds. Above them, stars began to pierce the twilight sky, quiet, patient, eternal. But the message written in every maneuver, every intercept, every counterstrike was simple. You cannot threaten without consequence, and when you try to break a hammer with bare hands, you only end up with broken bones. The sea, ever shifting, ever waiting, bore silent witness.